Hi friends, and welcome back to Cozy Rosy Reads. I'm August, and today we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of January, the first month of 2021. It was a really successful reading month. Surprisingly, I had some reads that became my new all-time favorites. So that's why it was just such a splendid reading month, and I am so excited to share some of my new absolute all-time favorites with you all. Halfway through the month of January, I did decide to use a random genre generator to choose my next reads for me. So I've discussed this quite a few times in my reading vlogs, as well as my introduction to this channel. I've been really toying with this little brain thought idea that once I finish a wheel, because I'm just using a website called Wheel of Names, to spice it up and not do genres, maybe do colors, and when the wheel lands on a specific color, that has to be the color of the cover of the next book that I read, or doing letters, and whatever letter it lands on, it has to be that author's last name or something. I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking outside the box here and trying to kind of come up with some more creative ideas to figure out my TBR, since I really don't know what I'm gonna read until I close the cover on the book I'm currently reading and I'm like, okay, I just finished it. And then I find out. There's something so thrilling about it, about not knowing what I'm going to read and then being able to pick out what I want to read in that mood. So it's like you have a TBR, but then you also are a little bit of a mood reader, which is exactly what I like. It's really nice. So without further ado, I would like to share some statistics with you all on what I read in January. This is my first time calculating statistics. I'm not sure if it's something that I'll do every time, but if you're interested in knowing specific things like the amount of pages I read, the genres I read from, or any additional information, let me know. I'm happy to figure out more and add more, or just not do them at all. So I would love your feedback. Here we have our statistics for the month of January. So in January, I read a total of 10 books. I read a total of 2,798 pages. This was my first time ever counting the pages that I've read, and it was really time consuming, but very interesting to find out. Genres that I read. Okay, so I read 3 memoirs, 2 literary fictions, 1 graphic novel, 1 historical fiction, 1 YA, 1 horror, and 1 science fiction. As you can tell throughout there, that's when my random genre generator came into play, when it was just one of so many different genres, because I was actually not in control of what genres I was reading. I had 3 5-star books, 3 4-star books, 2 3-star books, and 2 books that I did not end up rating. That is a really good reading month. The first book that I read in January in 2021 was The Bird Artist by Howard Norman. This is a moody, atmospheric, historical fiction mystery novel, and it takes place on the coast of Newfoundland in 1911. So it has just by the sea, it's dark, it's dreary, it's cold, and you have this really small community of quirky characters. I thought the writing in this was so beautiful. I loved the poetic descriptions of this land, of this time period, the moodiness, the atmosphere, the candlelight, the feasts. It was just so cozy and warm, and I really enjoyed the atmosphere and the setting of this book. It really was incredibly lovely. The story itself, though, it focuses and is written from this main character, Fabian's perspective, and he is the bird artist. So he actually draws birds for a living, which I thought was so interesting. And the book opens up with Fabian confessing that he murdered the lighthouse keeper, Botho August. And the rest of the book kind of backtracks and shares the motive and what happened and led to Fabian killing the lighthouse keeper. Overall, I thought this was a really intriguing story. I thought it was really mysterious. I think, though, the atmosphere and the mood really made me feel more than it made me feel for the actual story. This copy I found at Goodwill, and I love the gold inlay, if you can tell from the cover here. And apparently this is Howard Norman's first book in a Canadian trilogy, so I'd be kind of curious to see the other books. I thought the characters were really interesting. They had really wonderful dialogue back and forth where it was really quick and witty and funny. But near the end it started to drag on a little bit for me. I kind of, even in retrospect, don't really remember how the book ended, and I kind of don't really care. For me, this was just definitely a book about scenery that I just really fell into and I really loved. But overall, the story itself, I don't know. I didn't really feel much. I didn't really feel that excited about it. It was just kind of a book, so that's why I gave it 3 stars. So that is the first book that I read in 2021, which I think set the bar pretty nicely because it did have such atmospheric, moody, cozy vibes, which I just really liked. So that is The Bird Artist. The second book that I read in January was Amy Schumer's The Girl with the Lower Back Tattoo. I actually thrifted this copy at Goodwill maybe a year ago and never got around to reading it, but then I saw it was on Libby and I was like, hey, like, okay, I'll just give it a listen because I love memoirs, and when I go thrifting and I just see memoirs, I just want to pick them up regardless because I love hearing people's stories about themselves, and especially listening to audiobooks that are memoirs where it's narrated by the author. I find it extremely, like, I don't know, it's just cozy. It feels like you're just listening to someone tell you the story of their life, like you're just sitting down to coffee and listening to them talk. And this one was definitely one of those. You know, Amy Schumer narrated the audiobook, so I ended up not opening this copy at all because I found the audiobook, and I really, you know, it was enjoyable. I think it was interesting to know a little bit more about Amy and who she really is, and like her childhood and her relationship with her family, as well as like finding out that she's actually a huge introvert, which I would never have guessed or known. Hearing her own experience really humanized her for me, especially because of all the really awful things that the media portrays her as, or just people just love to hate her for no reason, which I think is just really gross. I ended up not giving this book a rating though, just because it is a memoir and I'm not gonna give you a rating based on what I thought of your life. So typically with like memoirs, I don't give a rating. That's it. So there we go. The third book that I read in January, I'm gonna get emotional talking about it. It has wormed its way into like top tier, all-time favorite book ever. I've expressed this in like my introduction video to booktube about how much this book means to me, how I have some like plans to get some tattoos inspired by this book. Everything about it, like, just it hit me. It hit me in a way that I haven't been hit by a book in a while, and that is Snow by Betsy Howie. I found this book at our like local used bookstore where it's like really creaky old wood floors and like floor to ceiling books, and everything's kind of slanted, like the bookcases are just like wibbly wobbly and stacks of books on the floor. So this was actually a book that I found on the floor of that bookstore. So basically it follows this unnamed woman who recently just got divorced. She lives in New York City and she decides to go and rent a cabin and just kind of like isolate from the world for a little bit. When she gets there though, the cabin is kind of in the middle of nowhere and she gets completely snowed in, and that's where things start to happen. So her cats start talking to her and she has to go out and find and forage food outside and get help because she's snowed in and they're running out of food, they're running out of supplies, so she has to like go outside. And once she does, she's encountered by this polar bear who is like kind of colorful and magical, and you're just like, whoa, what is happening? And he's really scary, but then it turns out that he's really just like a part of her personality. It's anger, and the anger is really fueled by fear. So all of these talking animals really represented different parts of her emotionally. There are parts of ourselves that we can project onto other things, onto animals, onto other people. This book just so uniquely and like metaphorically described emotions and self-discovery and self-love and care, and really appreciating who we are as people even when things are scary and we don't like ourselves. I don't know, like just so I know it sounds like really weird, like maybe I'm just making all this up and really is just like a very literal, like, yeah, the cats are talking. kooky kind of story, but I'm just like, oh my god, no, it's just so profound. But no, I loved this book. I love everything about it. It's really, really short and tiny. I loved the writing style. I love how it was like confusing and quirky and discombobulated. Those are the kinds of books that I really, really, really attach myself to and I really love. So this was just like the best thing ever, and I love it so much, and I really, really can't wait to reread it, especially reading it in the snow in January. Like, it was just so fantastic. So that is Snow by Betsy Howie, and I'm sorry if I totally butchered like the description of it, because I really don't know how to best describe this book. I could go on about it forever though, and I'm not going to. The next book that I read is White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi, and I read this over on the Libby app just on my phone. This is such a like cryptic horror novel. This book follows a family who lives in like an inn in Dover, so atmosphere was fantastic. Family, there is a set of twins, and there's a boy and a girl. They're both at the age where they're about to leave high school and go into university, and their mother just recently passed away. It kind of discusses grief, but also just family in such a unique, interesting way. The daughter, she suffers from pica, which is where you eat things that you really should not eat, you really can't ingest. Hers is mainly chalk, and she was recently checked out of a facility and is trying to return back to normal life, but there is some strange things happening in the house, where the house is like pulling her back in, doesn't want her to get better, doesn't want her to get healthier. And this book just was so eerie, especially in the way it was written. There were, you know, paragraphs that were really choppy and sentences that were just kind of like thrown out, and I really liked how cryptic and interesting this book was to just read. What was the most fascinating and interesting part of this book for me personally was that the book was written in many perspectives, and sometimes you wouldn't really know who and what character you were reading from until, you know, a few pages in. But one of the characters was actually the house itself, the inn that this all takes place in, and it is very eerie how disturbing this house thinks and its thought process, and how it follows everyone's movements in the house and in the inn. It was very chilling and like spine tingling. Truly a unique book, and it does talk a lot about immigration and race, discrimination, injustice, as well as like grief and intergenerational trauma. It just did it so well, where there was just this underlying feeling of like this hatred towards people for no reason at all. And it just eloquently put it all together into this one thing. This is definitely a book that left me confused. It didn't feel like there was a resolution or an ending, and I really liked that though. So if you're into books that like you want things to be tied up and to make sense, I don't recommend this one necessarily, but I think it was overall just a wonderful experience to be a part of. I think it was just like so eerie and so wonderfully done, and I'm really, really excited to read more from Helen Oyeyemi's collection and the other books that she's written, because I really thoroughly enjoyed her writing style. So overall, I gave this book a 4 out of 5. I thought it was really chilling if you're looking for a really spooky winter read. White is for Witching is definitely a wonderful read for that. The next book that I read is And I Don't Want to Live This Life by Deborah Spungen. This book I was gifted from my mom for Christmas. She had to read it for one of her college classes while she was studying psychology. And this is actually written from the mother of Nancy, of Sid and Nancy. If you don't know, Sid was a musician in the band the Sex Pistols. Nancy was found in a hotel room, stabbed, dead, and they were lovers, they were in love with each other. Yeah, he was about to face trial, but then he OD'd and he died as well. So there's just a lot of conspiracy theories around this, like did Sid really kill Nancy? Like he was in love with her? Did she kill herself? Was there a third person in there? There's just a lot of mystery wrapped up in it, and no one really knows what happened. This book though, it doesn't necessarily follow the Sex Pistols, and it only at the very end does it actually talk about her, like Nancy's relationship with Sid and her death and what kind of led up to it and what followed her passing away. But this is mainly just like a psychological memoir of growing up with Nancy. She was a very difficult child from a very young age. By the age of 2, she was threatening her parents and like threatening her mother. Her early years attacked her mother with like a hammer, hated her siblings, and would have these like horrible, scary temper tantrums where you just never felt safe around her. She would like attack and scream and break things and was just completely uncontrollable. Doctors didn't want to work with her. No one said they could help. They were just like, we literally can't help your daughter. We don't know what's wrong with her. There's nothing wrong with her. And this poor woman, Deborah, like just had to raise this child on her own without knowing what to do. The issue then too was like Nancy actually had a really, really high IQ. She was extremely intelligent, but when it came to emotional development and issues, like she was just always had a lot of problems with it. And this book just is a huge, huge deep dive into everything that this family was going through and how Nancy was such a problematic child and how she divided this entire family and how divisive she made everybody in the household, and how poor Deborah, her mom, was like, I'm her mom and I love her, but like I want her to go away, like she is just ruining everyone's lives. This is just raw and candid and honest and real, and it was, I think, by far one of the most impactful memoirs I've read in a long time. I was just completely engrossed in it. I felt like I was a part of that family because it felt so, like, I felt like I was just in the story. I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. I ended up giving it a 5 stars on Goodreads. I know it's a memoir and I know I'm contradicting myself, but this was just truly an amazing story and read, and this was the only book Deborah ever wrote. But it is so well written and so horrifying and just absolutely fantastic. So 5 stars, and I don't want to live this life. The next book I actually listened to over on the Libby app. It took me 8 weeks to get my hold and my copy of this, and that was The Best of Me by David Sedaris. This is a collection of all of his essays, short stories, fiction, nonfiction, and it was really enjoyable. I love that the audiobook had clippings of his live shows as well as some essays that he's just read aloud, so you get just a really good mix of stories in here. It was just thoroughly enjoyable. Unfortunately, I had listened to quite a few of the stories already, and I've read a few of them. I've read a lot of David Sedaris' collection, so there were a lot of repeat stories for me. Almost like 40 to 50% was like things that I'd already listened to, so I ended up not giving this one a rating. If you are interested in David Sedaris, I think this is definitely a wonderful book to add to the collection, just because it was like really a nice smattering of like everything that he's kind of done and his personal favorite collections. If you have the option though to listen to the audiobook, I really recommend it, just because like, who doesn't love David Sedaris' voice? I find it so charming and wonderful and calming, and I absolutely love his stories about his family, how he kind of juxtaposes like sadness and trauma and grief with something as like familiar as family, and like the quirky ongoings and the inside jokes and the funny things that happen in a family. I don't know, there's just something just so welcoming and accessible about that, and yeah, I just thoroughly enjoy his work. The next book that I read was Coriander by Sally Gardner. This has to be my favorite cover of all time. All time. Like, I would love to have a print of this. Unfortunately though, the book didn't really live up to the hype of the cover for me, which was really disappointing. This is a like YA fantasy, but I'm very confused because the story itself feels like very, very middle grade, but the writing was YA-esque. I don't know what the intended audience was for this book, and it was just really disappointing. Basically, this story follows Coriander, who is this young girl in the 17th century living in London with her family, living in a pretty nice house. It takes place during the Commonwealth in England, so there's a lot of power shifting and things kind of resulting because of that shift of power to this family. But Coriander ends up losing her mother, and her father then has to marry a Puritan woman just because of the shifting of powers. In order to like save his home and his assets, like he has to marry like a Puritan woman, so he does. He just quickly gets married, and this woman is like just so vile and evil. So poor Coriander is like harassed and assaulted by this new stepmother, who also brings in this preacher guy, and they're just like such horrible, evil, vile people. I didn't like them as characters. Obviously, they were horrendous. But then Coriander kind of just slips into this like treasure chest to hide away from them and ends up getting transported into this other realm where she then discovers and uncovers secrets from her mother's past. I had a lot of issues with this book. One of them was the writing. It was just very clunky and discombobulated. It just felt really difficult to read, even though the content itself wasn't difficult to read, if that makes sense. The sentence structure just felt really uncomfortable for me, and I was like, oh, I can't get into a flow state. Another thing was that the story was just not there. It told a lot of elements rather than actually showing them. This was true with like emotions, fantastical elements of the book. That's like why it was categorized as fantasy. But it never really actually showed it. It just told us that, like, just believe it, it's there, just believe it, this character feels this way, without actually ever showing it through their actions or their personality. So I just really, really struggled with this book. I don't know if younger me would have enjoyed this book either, though. I kept catching myself thinking, like, if this book wasn't so beautiful, if I didn't find myself so attracted to this cover, as well as this, like, inside map detail, would I have given it a 3-star, which is inevitably what I gave it? And the answer is most likely no. I think I was definitely biased just because of the artwork. I was just very biased with the atmosphere and the mood. I really did like the historical elements of this. I did really enjoy what it could have been, and it just fell so flat. I was so bored. There's also an insta-love romance in here, which it was so unbelievable and frustrating for me. I don't think I would ever give this book to a child to read either. So overall, I was just like very disappointed in this. I had really high hopes. This was a book that I found, yeah, while thrifting, and I just felt so like, oh my gosh, what a great gem, what a great find. And then it just ended up really falling flat for me. So that is Coriander. The next book I read I actually talked about quite a lot in length and detail in one of my reading vlogs, which I will link down below. But this was The Disaster Tourist by Ko-Eun. This is a Korean science fiction, and oh my gosh, I loved this book so much. This was just such a unique read. It follows the main character Yona, who works in this tourist agency, like travel agency, that specializes in touring and traveling to destinations that have been like decimated by disasters. So natural disasters like flooding, earthquakes, volcano eruptions, as well as like human disasters like massacres, bombings, like war zones, which I thought was just such an interesting concept because us as humans, we are really, you know, there's an accident on the side of the road, like we tend to look like we're kind of fascinated by these things, but as long as we're from a safe distance, like we're not harmed by it, we're not close enough. So I just thought the concept was really interesting that this tourist agency capitalized on disasters and using them as a way to market an area. But basically Yona is facing some like sexual harassment at work, so there are a few trigger warnings for those scenes, and she's sent to a disaster region in Vietnam, and she gets to experience the resort for herself and see what the tourist attractions really are like. And then things just start to unravel all on their own accord, and you are just like sketched out by everybody. Don't feel like you can trust anyone. What is really real? And it was just one of the most like fun and adventurous and smart science fiction books that I've read in a while. So I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I gave this 4 stars. I got this one for free over on Libby. This is one that my random genre generator chose science fiction for me, and I was like kind of shaking in my boots a little bit because I was like, I don't think I really have fully allowed myself to get swaddled by the like science fiction genre. It's something that still kind of scares me a little bit because I feel like it's gonna be too intense, almost like too masculine, if that's like makes sense, like adventure-y, Star Trek-y, Star Wars-y, which are just things that like I've never really been into personally, but I'm definitely open to giving them a try. So I just went on Libby and was like looking up science fiction books and just kept scrolling until I found something, and this was definitely everything that I was looking for. This is Ko-Eun's first book to be translated, so I'm really hoping that more of her work is translated because it was just stunning. I love the writing style. I love the story. Again, the story was so incredibly smart. If you want even more juicy thoughts on it, I would definitely recommend checking out my reading vlog, which is linked below, because I definitely talk a little bit more as I'm reading it, like what I'm discovering and what I'm feeling. So that was just a really fun ride. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, so that is The Disaster Tourist. Okay, we're almost there, friends. I just have 2 more books to wrap up to you. Oh my gosh, if I read more books. This is why I think vlogs are really important for this channel in specific, so I can get a little bit further in depth with these juicy books without having to have like over an hour-long video. So if you're interested in finding out more detail about the books I'm reading as I'm reading them, I definitely recommend checking out my vlogs, which right now are coming out like I'm filming like once a week, so good stuff. I then read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This was my first Baldwin ever. I loved this book. This was 5 out of 5. This was the last like 5-star read that I had of January. And I immediately was just like so immersed in the story and just fell head over heels for James Baldwin's writing style. Oh my gosh, it's just impeccable. It is perfect. It was so atmospheric. So if you don't know what Giovanni's Room is about, it follows the main character, David, which this book is written from his perspective, as his girlfriend has like kind of left the country. He lives in Paris and she's off traveling away. They are kind of trying to figure out if they should commit to each other and get married or not. But while she's away, David becomes attracted to a man named Giovanni. And the rest of the book is David trying to suppress these feelings for Giovanni, believing that they're not right because this took place and was written in like the 1950s. It's not very socially acceptable to be in a relationship with a man. David is just really struggling with this relationship with Giovanni because he does feel an attraction to him. He feels a love for Giovanni. They spend months together in Giovanni's room, which David describes as just being like so claustrophobic and uncomfortable and unsettling, and that's just kind of where he has to deal with all these demons of like, you're doing something wrong because you shouldn't be in a relationship with a man. And it just kind of bounces back and forth. There's a lot more plot and things, but I won't spoil it obviously. But I already can't wait to reread this. I'm hoping that next winter I can pick it up again because like it was just so beautiful and atmospheric, and it's just a lot of intimate dialogue between people. I mean, it feels like you're just immediately thrown into the middle of a conversation with people and you just feel the energy between them. Like, it was just so well-rounded and fleshed out and emotional and gorgeous. And yeah, I actually read this one during a reading vlog as well. So if you're interested in actually hearing a few passages of getting to know a little bit more about my thoughts of it, I will link that video down below as well. So that is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Oh friends, we have made it. We are here. The final book of January 2021 was Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. This was a late night, I can't fall asleep book for me. I found it over on Libby, so it was free, and I just read it on my phone, and wow, I'm so happy I did. This is a horror graphic novel that is spliced up into several different short stories that kind of all end up on like cliffhangers, so it kind of feels like a campfire story. It was eerie. The art style was absolutely incredible. I absolutely loved the art style. The colors were so vibrant and saturated, primary colors, so it just was absolutely stunning to look at and just like immerse yourself in. Overall, I gave this book 4 stars for the experience of reading it, just because it was so much fun. It was really like just a quick fly through because it is a graphic novel. My favorite stories in this collection was the second story, which is called Our Neighbor's House. I love this one primarily because of the setting. It takes place in this like Victorian mansion, so I absolutely love the art style of like the vaulted ceilings and the chandeliers and like the dresses. I really love the art of this one. And my favorite story, like the actual story that was really eerie, was called The Nesting Place. And this one just was so unsettling. This was the second to last story in that book, and the art is really, really disturbing and gross and like really horrifying. Like I was definitely audibly like as I was reading it. So yeah, just, you know, be aware there is definitely some like gruesome stuff, but overall this book didn't scare me as much as I really wanted it to. But like I would just absolutely love to have a copy just so I can look at the art and like just flip through it and just like admire the artwork, because it was just so absolutely stunning. So that is it, my friends, my first ever book wrap up for January of 2021. Thank you all so much for watching if you made it this far. Oh my gosh, that was a lot of books. So far in February, I am having like a great reading month, and I'm really excited to share more with you all very soon. Still sticking with the random genre generator, but if you all have like suggestions of what you would like to see or what information you would like to know about the books that I read, or how you would like to enjoy watching wrap-ups, if you have any suggestions, comments, like I would just absolutely love to hear, and I just so appreciate you all being here for my first ever monthly wrap-up. Thanks so much, friends. I will see you all very soon. Bye!